Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. So, here comes the part 2 of Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. So, friends, in the previous session, I have discussed about the Pilgrim's Progress, book 1 means part 1, and in this session, I'm going to discuss the summary of part 2 of Pilgrim's Progress. So, before starting the summary of part 2, I am highly recommending that please go through the video of part 1 of the Pilgrim's Progress. The link is in the description box. Okay, so do check out. So now let's start the summary of part 2 of the Pilgrim's Progress. Friends, actually, John Bunyan was a Puritan preacher and he remained captive for 12 years for the violation of the Conventicle Act of 1664. And there in the prison, he wrote this novel, The Pilgrim's Progress. So, likewise, the part 1, in the part 2 also, there is a small portion which is written in verse form. Here, Bunyan mentions the various objections that he faces while writing this piece. So, here, John Bunyan is addressing someone. In the first part, he was addressing Christian to go in the path of the celestial city. And now, in this part, John Bunyan is addressing Christian's wife, whose name is Christiana. To retrace the first pilgrim means to retrace Christian. Who was the first pilgrim? To retrace Christian's steps. Here, John Bunyan is commanding Christiana these things. John Bunyan also announces that Christiana will be traveling with their children on the same pilgrimage that Christian did. It means that John Bunyan is hoping or is addressing or we can say is commanding Christiana to travel on the same pilgrimage that Christian did in order to reach to the celestial city. So, friends, after referring the theme of this part 2, John Bunyan expresses that Christiana in her path will meet several objections. So here he is actually using Christian as a metaphor for the book. Okay, here actually John Bunyan wants to say that John Bunyan himself faces some objections in writing this. Okay, so actually the first objection is that some people might not believe that Bunyan wrote this second Pilgrim's Progress. Then Bunyan proclaims that he is willing to come and defend his work to anyone that questions it. It means that Bunyan is firm in his decision that if anyone question his work, then Bunyan is quite ready to defend it. And then Bunyan also brings out the second objection in writing this book, and that is the negative reaction that many readers had to Bunyan's first volume. Okay, so then Bunyan is opening a part 2, reassures his reader that the criticism was born of fear and shame, and that many readers across the world embraced and internalized his work. Apart from these objections, there are also other objections which Bunyan has talked in this opening portion of this part 2. So, after this, likewise, the first part, here in the second part, also the narration of this novel opens with Bunyan's dream. In his dream, he was explaining that he has seen the story of the family of Christian whom Christian left behind. And in Bunyan's dream, he encounters a person called Mr. Sagacity who tells him, means Mr. Sagacity in the dream of John Bunyan tells John Bunyan that Christian's family, means his wife and his sons, also went through various mockeries by Christian's neighbors because Christian has left them. Okay. Then Mr. Sagacity tells Bunyan that although Christiana and her four sons were devastated when Christian left, but soon there comes the second thought in their minds and they also make the decision to follow the path of Christian in order to reach to the celestial city. Okay. And Mr. Sagacity also explained to Bunyan that one day Christiana saw a dream and then she realizes the gravity of her sins. Then she awakes, but also she becomes asleep, and then she had another dream in which she sees her husband in heaven. And after this dream, she wakes up in the morning, and then there comes a visitor named Sacred, who comes from heaven. He delivers a letter of election to Christiana and then he also bids her leave to the city of destruction with her boys. Okay. So actually Christiana and Christian have four boys, four sons. Now Christiana and her sons are quite happy to listen to the news of Mr. Sacred that they will also able to visit to the celestial city. So now Christiana begins to prepare for the voyage. Then her neighbors called Mrs. Timoras and Mrs. Mercy. They came and they actually tried to stop her from going to the celestial city, from going to the voyage. Okay. But Christiana didn't listen to them and she is quite adamant in her decision and she refuses to listen to them. Now, Mrs. Marcy is quite touched by Christiana's faith and she also decides to join Christiana and her family on their pilgrimage. So now, all of them means Mrs. Marcy, Christiana, and the four sons of Christiana set off on the journey. Soon they reached to the Slough of Despond. Okay, so Slough of Despond is a muddy area. Okay, so, with all their faith, the sixth person means Miss Marcy Christiana and her four children of Christiana, they get out through this slope despond very smoothly. Okay. So, friends, this story was told by Mr. Segacity to the author, and now at this point, we means the reader are once again inside Bunyan's dream. Now we're gonna see how Christiana and her group come to the wicket gate. So, as the group reached to the wicket gate, then Christiana, who was the eldest of the group, she goes to knock at the door of the wicket gate. But there comes no response. Then eventually there comes a dog who scares the group of pilgrims. But Christiana keeps knocking and eventually the gatekeeper admits Christiana and the boys through the gate. But Mrs. Marcy is still left outside the gate. But then Christiana pleads to the gatekeeper and then finally he allows Mrs. Marcy to come through the gate. So then the Lord comes down to the women and he explains to the women and the group that the duty of the dog in the gate is to sort out the brave pilgrims from the fearful ones. Okay. So friends, now this group is safe and they are all set to set out on the next phase of their journey. So now Christiana and the group reached to an orchard that is the devil's orchard. Okay, though Christiana here warns her son that do not eat the fruits of the garden, but still Christiana's sons begin to eat them. So after this, there comes two men called the ill-favored ones. They try to solicit Christiana and Mercy, but Christiana spurns them and they actually, Marcy and Christiana, cry for help and they actually call some inhabitants, including the reliever. And then the ill favored ones quickly exit from the place. Now, this group also reached to the place called the House of the Interpreter, where in the part 1, Christian also reached. Okay. So, now in this House of the Interpreter, there is a person called the Interpreter. He actually shows this group means Christiana and her team all the things that he showed to Christian in the part 1. But here he also showed this team several new things. Okay. After this, the group dines with the interpreter, and then in the next morning, the interpreter sends the pilgrimage, means this group, Christian and her team, to a place called Birth of Sanctification, where this team get new white clothes. Okay. After this team resume their journey with the guide called Mr. Greatheart. Then in their way, they saw by the side of road the hanging people, some hanging people named Simple, Sloth and Presumption. So these characters are actually the character of the part 1. They actually refused the help of Christian and now as a punishment, they hanged by the side of the road. Okay. So after this, the group reached to the hill difficulty and they rest on that arbor where Christian had forgot his scroll. And in this arbor also, Christiana forgets her bottle of spirits that the interpreter gave her. Okay. So after this, they see the place where in the part 1 of this novel, two people called Mistress and Timoras tried to steer Christian towards the lions. Okay. But now, as a punishment to the sin that Mistress and Timoras done by trying Christian to steer towards the lions, the tongues of Mistress and Timoras were burned with a hot iron. Okay. So now Christiana and her team reached the place where the lions are chained, where Mr. Greatheart fights with a Grim who actually tries to prevent the pilgrims from continuing on their journey. Okay. After this, the pilgrims with Mr. Greatheart reached to the palace beautiful. Now, at this point, Mr. Greatheart returns to the house of the interpreter. Okay. Then there is a person in the gate of the palace beautiful named Watchful. He rings the bell of the gate and they enter, means the pilgrims enter to the palace. There is a maid called Prudence. She quizzes each of the boy of Christiana, and now the name of the boys of Christiana are revealed that Christiana has four boys and the name of them are James, Joseph, Samuel, and Matthew, respectively. Okay. And Prudence is quite impressed with the education of Christiana's sons that actually Christiana has given to them. Okay. So, in the palace, beautiful, one person named Mr. Brisk tries to woo Mercy to join him or to make Mercy his housewife. But Mercy vows that she will not compromise her principles for any men. Okay. So while they were living at this palace, Matthew becomes ill because he ate those forbidden fruits from the devil's orchard. So now a doctor named Mr. Skill treated him and gave him some pills to take. After this, several incidents occurred and then Mr. Greatheart again joins the group. And now this group, with pity and prudence from the palace beautiful, reached to the valley of humiliation and they also passed it safely. Then they have reached to the valley of shadow of death and there Mr. Greatheart fight with a giant named Mole and finally Mr. Greatheart become victorious and they finally cross the valley. After this, in their way, they met with a person named Honesty, and then this group reached to an inn. There, they are welcomed by the innkeeper named Gaze. In that inn, the pilgrims remain for a month, and there, the marriage between Matthew and Mercy occurs. Okay, and with Gaius, Mr. Greatheart goes to a mission in order to fight with a giant named Slaygood, and finally, in the battle, in the duel between Mr. Greatheart and Slaygood, Mr. Greatheart becomes victorious, and from there they rescued a person named Mr. Feeblemind. Okay, and then from there they rescued one person called Mr. Feeblemind, and they took Mr. Feeblemind with them. And then in the inn of Gaius, Gaius's daughter called Phoebe is married to Christiana's son James. Okay. So now this group with Mr. Feeblemind, Mr. Greatheart, Christiana and the other people again start their journey. Friends, now the group of the pilgrims becomes large, okay? And now finally they have reached to the town called Vanity. There they are welcomed by one person called Mr. Emination and his daughter named Grace. And there also Mr. Emination's two daughters named Grace and Martha are married to Samuel and Joseph, who are the sons of Christiana. So Mr. Greatheart with some other men, other good men of this town fight with a monster and rescue some children who remain captive under that monster. So friends, after this they have passed the silver mine and then they arrive at the field before the detectable mountains. After this they arrive at the road for Doubting Castle and there Mr. Greatheart and the other good men defeats Despair who was the giant and his evil wife Decedent. And from their capture they saved some pilgrims, including a person named Despondency and his daughter Machafrit. And because of this victory, means because of Mr. Greatheart and some other good men's victory against the giant Despair, the shepherds give the pilgrims a feast and show them some wonders of the land, including Mount Marvel and Mount Charity. Okay. So after this, the pilgrims encounter a person called Mr. Valiant for Truth, who also joins this stream. Then this stream reaches to the enchanted ground. And there, at the end of this ground, they also encounter a person named Mr. Stanfirst, who also joins this stream. Then this varied group arrived at a place named Beulah and there they remained for some time until their Lord summoned them in order to cross the river in order to reach to the celestial city. And finally Christiana first crosses the river. And then the other pilgrims, including Mr. Ready to Halt, Mr. Feeble Mind, Mr. Honesty, Mr. Valiant for Truth, Mr. Stand First, cross the river one by one. But Christiana's sons and their wives stayed behind the river in order to help the future pilgrims as well as in order to grow the church on earth. Okay. So, friends, this is the end of part 2 of the novel called The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan.